Some houses grieve, and some refuse to let go of the dead. In this episode, I sit down with returning guest Blaine Daigle to unravel the shadows of his latest Gothic-folk horror novel, The Ashes of August Manor. We explore its slow burn dread, the blurred line between compassion and obsession, and the way grief can take on a life of its own. If you enjoy conversations like these and would like to support the show, head over to patreon.com/The Dark Mind Podcast and become a member. You'll get exclusive daily blog posts and weekly book and film reviews, including dark narrative fiction stories produced and narrated by me, Vincent Midgard. Your support helps keep the dark conversation alive. So without further ado, I give you Blaine Daigle. Blaine, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back, Vincent.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining me on this 13th day of July 2025. In The Ashes of August Manor, as always, in your signature style, you maintain the dark, gothic, immersive atmosphere, the romanticization of the inevitability of death, and with this one, employed one of my favorite tropes, which I won't spoil. So thank you for sending me a copy and joining me on the show to discuss it.
Oh, you're more than welcome. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Absolutely. So the book follows a young woman named Noelle, beautiful name, by the way, who works at a hospice inpatient center, or inpatient unit, I should say. She cares for the dying and is always present at the end. And though she seems to love her job, it's unclear whether she has a compassionate heart or is simply drawn to death. She's also a struggling fiction writer who is unable to focus, writing stories that obsessively circle themes of mortality. One night, Noelle receives a call at work from a woman named Isabel August. Isabel's father is terminally ill, and she's looking for someone to live in and care for him during his final days. Isabel offers Noelle a life-changing sum of money, enough to quit her job and start over, and after some deliberation, Noelle accepts and travels to the secluded village of Bell River. But when she stops at the local library for directions, the librarian's demeanor shifts the moment she hears Noelle is headed to the August estate. She warns her to turn back, that the August family is no good, and that's where the story begins. So, in Chapter 1, we're introduced to the world of a young boy named Elias. Throughout this opening, death is intimate. It isn't loud or gory. It's slow, quiet, even tender. Do you think horror is more effective when it whispers rather than screams?
I think there's room for both, but I think that for me personally, the kind of horror that I enjoy is the kind that is a little bit quieter, so that when it does decide to scream, that scream's got a little bit more impact. That's how I've kind of always viewed it. Whereas the quieter a story is as it's being told, when you get those moments of loudness, they're amplified. So I think with this book especially, that was kind of what I was aiming for. I wanted to have something quiet where when you get these moments of noise, they're louder, they're more amplified, they're more impactful. And I think for me, and the kind of horror that I enjoy and the kind of horror that I write, I think that's definitely true. Kind of ties in with how I pace my stories, how I structure them, I'm kind of always trying to have that quiet lingering to when, the big boom does in fact happen. Maybe I can make it sound a little louder, make it hit a little bit harder because of how quiet everything has been before that.
Gotcha. Give it a bit of a backdrop for a bit of contrast.
Yes.
Gotcha. Well, in chapter 2, we find Noelle at her job in the hospice center. She's just called the time of death on one of the many patients she'd grown attached to and is attempting to do a little writing on her break. Noelle is haunted not just by what she's seen, but by what she's written. How do you see the relationship between writing and grief in this story? Is creative expression a way out or another form of entrapment?
Can the answer be both?
Sure.
Because
the answer can be both to everything.
Like, I know for a fact that when I decided to write this book and I knew that the topic was going to be death, like, for instance, the book is dedicated, it says, "For Hall, I'm sorry I couldn't make it," which is referencing my grandfather who passed away, and his funeral was the day that the one day in the last 12 years that we got snow down here in Louisiana and the roads were iced over and I couldn't make the funeral. And it crushed me. And I remember that was around the time where I started kind of figuring out what I wanted to do with my first novel. And in a lot of ways, writing about grief was an outlet. It was a way to kind of get things that I couldn't say or that I felt inside out and, weight off my shoulders. While at the same time, though, I feel like, I was always very careful to try to maintain that line between, the fiction and the real world, because I think that if you stew too much or you lose yourself too much in it, it can become a little bit of a form of entrapment. And especially when you talk about writers who have written about one specific thing before that they knew really, really, really well, it's really hard at times to break away from that. Like, I know for, all my books that I've written, grief horror has kind of been present. And I was joking with another author, shoot, man, I don't know what to do if I run out of ideas about that. Will I be able to do something different? So yeah, I think that it is a way of expression and a way to get things out, but I think that it can also, become a form of entrapment in both good and bad ways.
Yeah, I think there's plenty of grief in the world. I don't think you'll run out.
It's a fair point, yeah.
Yeah. But wow, kind of backtracking to the death of, you said it was your grandfather?
Yes.
Yeah, backtracking to the death of your grandfather. How apropos of the Ashes of August Manor, snow being trapped, the death of a patriarch, so to speak, and it being in Louisiana of all places.
Yeah. Yeah, the irony was not lost on me. I didn't really think about it until after I'd finished, writing it, and I was kind of, wrapping everything up, and it really did kind of hit me. And I was like, well, dang, dude, you talk about internalization, right?
Indeed. So you wrote, quote, "The only thing more lonely than death is life." And that's the kind of line that gets under the skin. So do you think Noelle is more afraid of dying or of continuing to live untouched by meaning?
For me personally, I think it's the second one. Personally, I don't think Noelle actually fears death, especially when you're around it as much as someone in her position would be. I think it sort of just becomes a very prevalent part of life that you witness a lot. And, the fear kind of goes away. But I think that for her, the idea of being left behind, because the dead don't experience leaving behind the living are left to kind of shoulder that. And I think for Noelle especially, there's almost a little bit of survivor's guilt there as well, where it's I'm still here, they're gone, and yet I'm this is eating away at her. So yeah, I think definitely the second one for Noelle specifically. I think she's much more afraid of continuing on in a life where she struggles to find meaning, especially when surrounded by one of the most meaningful things there is.
Yeah. Fun fact, my mom was a hospice nurse for quite some time and retired working in Houston, the inpatient unit, kind of like what Noelle works in. And I tried being a hospice volunteer, and I made it through 2 patients and I was done. It's just like you get attached to these people for a few weeks and then the next thing you know, they're gone. It's rough. So, well, at this point, the life-changing event of the phone call by Isabel August comes for her at work, no less, with the offer to be her father's live-in caretaker. When Isabel August calls Noelle, the invitation feels less like a job offer and more like a summoning. Did you intend for the phone call to signal a shift from grounded realism into something more mythic or fated?
Yes, 100%. I think recently I got a review that I read that it was a 1-star review. The person hated the book.
Ouch.
And but one of the things that they said was they're like, a lot of the stuff doesn't feel real. And I was like, good. Like, that's what I wanted.
Yeah.
I wanted that dream. Like the moment Isabel makes that offer and Noelle, goes on her little adventure, if you want to call it that, it really does take on a little bit of a dreamlike quality. It kind of, you're almost leaving the real world behind. The way that I kind of, think about it is like, it's almost like you're leaving the world of the living for the world of the dead.
Yeah.
And so like that, I think that definitely tracks.
Yeah, I mean, I understand if the individual, that's not their thing, they want everything grounded in reality or whatever. But I mean, I think you're pretty clear in the synopsis that it's a mix of Gothic and folk, which is just wound up in the surreal.
I was joking with Andrew. I was like, my God, if they didn't like the dreamlike stuff in this book, they're really going to hate my last book in the Dark and Endless Sea. That would.
Oh yeah, that would
one send them crazy.
That one took you down the rabbit hole, and then another rabbit hole, and then there was a basement.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Right, I was like, he's going to mention that book because that was
100%.
That actually was pretty upsetting, to be perfectly honest. It was great, don't get me wrong, but yeah, the level of surreal and dark, where it went was just, it was so out of touch with reality that it was like you just didn't. It's almost like I had to grab the desk and be like, okay, I'm still here, everything's good.
And well, with Ashes too, I was, when that call comes and you sort of get that transfer over from reality to unreality, the living in versus the dead. I kind of wanted to have that dreamlike air throughout the rest of the book. And a big reason for that is I almost kind of wanted, obviously I've heard people who have been on their dying, beds talking about what that experience is like. I've heard people who have worked in hospice centers talk about what their patients have said, things like that. And I almost wanted to try to replicate that feeling. The deeper Noelle gets into August Manor and all of its dark shadows, that almost like that feeling of being on your deathbed and, those chemicals in your brain firing and, all that entails. So, I mean, like, yeah, I hate the fact it's a 1-star rating, but like, it was one of those ones where I read it and I was like, perfect, man. That was all I was going for.
I don't appreciate the 1 star, but your summation is spot on. That's what I was going
for.
On. Well, aside from the surreal nature, a lot of this section is steeped in sensory decay. Before she fully pushes forward into that surreal nature, you're kind of in this sensory decay. You're talking about the smell of bleach, the feel of damp sheets, and the emptiness of Noelle's apartment. So what role does physical space play in shaping your characters' inner lives?
A lot. It's actually been something that's kind of a through line through all of my books. With, my first novel, The Broken Places, you had the cabin that sort of kind of takes on a little bit of a life of its own as the story goes on. Dark Rue, the house literally is degrading around them as their own mental state is degrading. Dark and Endless Sea, the ocean is changing, the cabins change. And, with this one, especially at these points of the story is where the character is sort of making the choice to push into where the rest of the story will take place. I like putting them in environments that can sort of mirror their mental state. Because for me, that does a good job at explaining. Because I think what the question that anybody might have to someone like living is like, what are you thinking? Like, why would someone do this? Why would you take this job? or why would you go on this trip? And I think that having the physical space actually manifests itself in a way that is representative of what the characters are going through is almost like a way of answering that question without really answering it. Sort of like just like a hint, like, yeah, like this is where they're at. Like, why wouldn't someone in this state go? Why wouldn't someone in this state leave, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point as far as the way you were going through your individual books. It's almost like in Dracula, where he goes through that blue inferno, and then at that point, that's it. It's like there's always a spot, there's always a place, and then there's always a spot. Like in this, there's a point where she gets to a fork in the road, and she can go right, which stands for right the fuck out of there, or she can go left and go through the gates into the manor. And and she even makes mention of it at that point. Is like, is it really possible for me to leave anyway? So yeah, that is a good. That is a common element that I really like about your work. Well, so Isabel's pitch is seductive, a new life, a way out, but it's also cloaked in wealth and isolation. So were you making a comment in any way on how privilege can sometimes be a more elegant form of entrapment?
And honestly, no. The way that I kind of viewed the seductive aspect of it would, I was thinking to myself, like, what would someone like Noelle gain? Like what would force her to actually take this job? And I was like, well, to not have to do this anymore. And then step 2 was, all right, well, what would make her not have to do this anymore? And then it was wealth. So, I mean, I guess maybe subtextually, then it ended up kind of making that statement. But it wasn't something I intended. It was just kind of like me trying to like piece together, like, okay, what would cause her to do this? Okay, what would cause that to happen? Okay, what would cause that to happen? And then it was all wrapped around, like you said, Isabel's seductive kind of almost hypnotic kind of ways that she speaks and the way that she kind of lures Noelle in. But yeah, that was the idea behind it.
Gotcha. Well, if I remember correctly, I think she's still in the hospice center. Just got off the phone with Isabel where she's trying to lay down on one of the couches. And there's a moment where she can't quite bring herself to lie on the couch because, quote, there wasn't enough space for someone else to lie. And that's a pretty intense line. Do you think people like her, people who bear witness to suffering every day, ever fully return to life where intimacy isn't haunted?
I don't know, man. It's hard to answer that because despite all the research that I did, despite all of the, deep thought about, how would someone go through this, I've never been in that situation. I can't speak for people that have been surrounded by something like this their entire lives. And with Noelle specifically, I mean, I don't want to, spoil too much, but I mean, she has a reason why that space next to her needs to be filled. And I think for her, in a way, death has become the only intimate partner she's got. It's become the only intimate part of her life. And it's a shockingly intimate part of her life. In a way, death knows you better than you know yourself. It knows what you're scared of. It knows, what your worst fears are in terms of how to go. I mean, let's be honest here. Everybody's thought about that one way we really don't want to go, right? So I think for her, and not to mention the fact, it's something that takes from you and then smiles in your face while it comes sits down next to you after it's stolen something from you. So I think in a lot of ways, death has sort of become the only intimacy that Noelle even knows.
Yeah. Well, in chapter 3, Noelle reflects on how she was, quote, respected, treated fairly, and valued. Yet the emotional weight of her hospice work is slowly eroding her. So do you think institutional acknowledgement can ever truly offset the personal cost of bearing witness to death? And I ask this question because it's kind of the conundrum that I'm dealing with at the moment. Yeah, without getting into that that nightmare. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. I can speak for myself here where it's, I'm a teacher, obviously. And I'm lucky enough that I work in a school where I do feel respected and valued by my administrators. And even still, man, that job wears on you. And that's just, teaching. Obviously there's some things like you unfortunately will deal with some horror stories when you find out what kids are going home to and things like that. But I don't know. I think people just have breaking points. I think that, you can put up your shields and you can put up any kind of defenses you want, but over time it's going to erode away. Everything erodes eventually. I mean, so I think that in a lot of ways, I think it's needed, obviously, to stick with it as long as you possibly can. Whether or not it will ever be enough to truly kind of make it, what's the word I'm thinking of, like bearable? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, as a teacher, you've got that status of the molder of young minds, and I hate to say you can't really use the word grooming anymore, so I'm not going to say grooming the next generation.
Yeah.
What would be another word? Preparing the next generation. Yeah. But yeah, I'm not sure what you have to actually deal with a teacher as far as, what they deal with when they go home. I don't know what the school's like where you are, if you ever had to deal with any sort of violence between students, stuff like that. But I don't know. You probably can't even allude as to whether any of that's true without getting in trouble, I'm assuming.
Yeah, probably not.
Okay, we'll just move on. Well, as mentioned in the synopsis, this is the point where Noelle arrives at the library in Bell River and asks the librarian, a woman named Rachel, for directions to the August estate. Rachel suddenly becomes very hostile when Rachel speaks ill of Isabel's father, Ernest August, and says that, quote, some people don't deserve care. Noelle responds, quote, everyone deserves to have someone by their side when they go. So what are you exploring about moral ambiguity and the ethics of compassion in this exchange?
I think for one, that statement is sort of Noelle's entire ethos. It's why she does what she does. It's why she doesn't just get the hell out of August Manor when things start going wrong, In terms of the moral ambiguity of the situation, I think it's important to know as well that, at this point, we haven't even met Ernest. We haven't even met Isabel yet. We haven't met any of the August family. All we're going by is this one person's statement of what this family is like. Noelle has no way of knowing if this woman is telling the truth or if this woman is, trying to lead her astray in some other way. So in a way, all Noelle can do is fall back on her ethos, which is that no one deserves to be by themselves when they go. And it's something that I thought about because I think a lot of people probably would disagree with her. A lot of people would probably think of certain people in their lives or some people that they know or figures or whatever, that they're like, well, they can die alone for all I care. And while it's something that I understand, because obviously anger and irritation cut pretty deep, to me, it's very almost of a cruel thought. Especially with something as final as death, something that, there's no yellow brick road on the other side of this. Like when you go, you go. So I don't, I kind of lean more with Noelle about at some point people need to have somebody, like, otherwise, what's the point of even living?
Yeah. Yeah. She makes a qualification as to, he's evidently never done anything to end up in jail. Do you think, depending on what somebody's done in their life, if they've committed some horrendous crime, that comes into play at all?
Man, you're hitting me with hard questions here. Yeah, I mean, all I can think of for myself is,
I would say no. I would say the foulest human being in the world should at least have somebody with them when they die.
Yeah, like let them like have a seance or something and summon a demon. The demon could be there. Who cares? Like somebody like.
Yeah, because I don't know. Everybody's morality, which may be relative, seems to change on their deathbed. When you're on your deathbed, that's when
Yeah.
you start confessing stuff,
It kind of, goes with the idea. And there's actually a chapter in this book titled Possible Grace. And it goes with the idea of grace, the idea that, at what point do we write somebody off completely? Do we give them until the very, very end to atone and to change? Which is, atonement is actually something that is another through line through a lot of my books. Like the idea of atonement, even pushed as far as to the end before making it. At what point do we say, no, there's no more atonement for you. You've crossed lines. It cannot be uncrossed. And, the idea of like being dead to me, things like that. And for that, I can only speak for myself there, and I can only speak for Noelle because I wrote her.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I would say that, there is a point where I'm sure, at least for me, you could get to where like, no, you're dead to me as far as like atonement is concerned. And I don't want to be with you while you die.
Yeah.
But somebody should, I think. Yeah. Well, let's get off that fucking subject.
It made me go into an existential crisis.
I know. Well, so at the library, the tension between past and present is almost palpable. Rachel refusing to modernize and the village stuck in time. How crucial is temporal dislocation to the atmosphere of horror in this book? Because there's the surreal nature, but then there's also this time. What am I trying to say? This. You're an English teacher. Help me out here. This bygone era.
Yeah.
Would that be it?
Yeah, that'd be it. I think for this one, especially because this at its core, while I can say this is a book about death, that might be the thematic idea. The theme of it really is it's about moving on from death and about moving on in general. And in a lot of ways, I think the town represents the idea of not moving on, refusing to change, refusing to step forward from where you were comfortable. The people of Bell River are still living like the book's set in the 90s and they're still living like it's 1956. And they like it that way, even as the world moves on around them. And I think there's other things in the book that, hint at that as well, like Noelle being given a typewriter as opposed to the word processors that were becoming popular during that point in history, the early 90s. And even Noelle has a struggle with that because she realizes that this thing is old fashioned and yet it feels so right. So I think that that's, where this book lies with that. It's like the idea of not moving on, even as everything else moves on around you. And in a lot of ways, that to me, that mirrors the idea of the living and the dead. In a way, the dead are moving on, the living are the ones stuck behind.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that typewriter, in chapter 4, where Noelle meets Isabel August, which is the daughter of Ernest August, not only was Noelle previously found by Isabel in kind of an unsettling way, just out of the blue, called her at work, but while being given a tour of the library within the manor, Isabel produces a copy of Noelle's own manuscript, somehow already in Isabel's possession, in an attempt to get her to finish it. So Isabel's explanation for how she came across Noelle, saying she had this great reputation as a good worker, isn't disturbing in and of itself. It's halfway believable, actually. But the fact that Isabel was able to obtain something so personal feels like the work of someone with access to a bit too close to that of an unethical private investigator or something like that. Why didn't this give Noelle the drive to run?
I think it does. I think she even has, if I'm not mistaken, I think she actually makes that comment like, this is ridiculous. Like, this is crossing a line. But once again, Noelle is someone with nothing left. She has to fall back on that ethos. And her ethos is, there is a dying man here and I'm supposed to help him. And in a way, and Isabel kind of cloaks it, I think, a little bit. She sort of justifies it in a way by saying, I think her exact words come basically down to I needed to know someone who was going to care for my father, was someone who understood death. And this story showed me that you understood it. So this is before I even called you. I made sure you did, which is complete and total bullshit. But it sounds good And in Noelle's current state of mind, it kind of goes with her ethos, which is that it's that bedrock that just holds her in place. It's something she can't really go against.
And on top of that, at that point, she's already uprooted herself. So
Yeah.
there's no going back now.
What's she gonna do? Drive back to the hospital and be like, "Sorry,
I didn't mean it." Can I start back? Yeah. Well, the August home. This is another. Let's see. What have we gone over so far? We've gone over the surreal nature. We've gone over the town being, kind of frozen in time, so to speak. Now, once we get to the August home, not only is it frozen in time, it doesn't just house grief, it amplifies it from the absence of electricity to the hollow quiet of its hallways. So now we're in a house that doesn't even have electricity, hence the mechanical typewriter. So the August Manor seems to feed off of loss. Was that a conscious tactic to force both the characters and the readers to sit with discomfort?
Absolutely. It was 100%. In a lot of ways, I approached August Manor the same way I approached the LeBeau house in A Dark Rue. Sort of kind of this big empty home that is hiding a lot of secrets under some really grimy film on its walls, essentially. And as the story kind of progresses and August Manor starts to show you a little bit more of its true face, it really does kind of exude that surrealness. I almost said surreality. I don't think that's a word.
It should be.
It should be. It's
hyper reality and surreality.
Yeah, it's a great sounding word.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was the basis behind. I wanted to make a setting that really made the reader uncomfortable. And if you read the book, you'll notice that in a lot of ways, it's a love letter to The Haunting of Hill House. And I've always thought that one of the reasons that The Haunting of Hill House was such a phenomenal and landmark piece of work is the way that Hill House is a main character itself with its own desires and its own, intentions. And I wanted August Manor to feel the same way. And so in order for that to happen, I really needed it to exude grief. I needed it to almost grieve as a person might grieve. The way that a person might turn off the lights in their room because they don't feel like dealing with the light of day. August Manor doesn't even have lights, only the dim, bit of candles. The way that a person might, only want to move around at night, August Manor comes alive at night. That was the whole point behind it. I definitely wanted to create that really discomfortable feeling in the readers with the manor, especially because, this is a Gothic quiet horror story. And I intentionally wrote this at a bit of a slower pace. It's a slow burn. And that was the intent behind it. So if I'm going to write the story and the story is going to progress in its own time, I think it's a horror book. There still needs to be that element of menace lingering as the story is building. And I think August Manor itself sort of applies that because of, the way you described it.
Yeah, it's a quiet slow burn though.
Yeah.
And I looked it up. Surreality is a word, at least Merriam-Webster. Yes. Merriam-Webster says so. So yeah, we're going with that.
I'm using it in the book now.
You seriously should be. Don't even joke about that.
100%.
All right. Fucking A. Yeah. As far as the discomfort is concerned, it made me think about an interview with Lars von Trier where he was saying how, I think he was talking about, what's the Melancholia? Mm-hmm. I think he was talking about he wanted that to feel like a pebble in your shoe.
I think I've heard that quote before.
Yeah. It may be the wrong movie, but one of his movies, he was saying, yeah.
That's honestly, that sounds like Melancholia. Yeah. It's been a long time since I've seen it.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It was well, I won't get into that. Anyway,
I can only take Von Trier in limited doses.
Yeah, me and my wife, my wife had never watched anything of his before, so we went through parts 1 and 2 of Nymphomaniac.
Oh God.
Yeah. It was censored though. It didn't show the abortion.
Oh, okay.
So yeah. So I'm gonna have to find that and show that. No,
the fact that that was a statement that you could make just shows that what that movie's all about.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, indeed. Well, let's see here. There is, so this is one of those characters. I'm trying to remember the name. There's a character in Ronald Malfi's latest book. It's just escaping me that had the same quality.
Senseless.
Yeah, what was the kid's name? The son?
I haven't read it yet.
Oh God. Anyway, he's one of those characters that's written just like Isabel. So
Okay.
just an uncanny calm to Isabel. And I love the way you wrote her because while we're deeply immersed in Noelle's emotional introspection, Isabel remains very compelling, especially through the precise descriptions of her physical presence and the subtle micro expressions Noelle observes. Like you can tell Noelle has suffered some trauma because she is extremely, what's the word when you're always on edge looking for something? Hyper aware?
Like hyper alert, yeah.
Yeah. Hyper alert to every, walking on eggshells to everybody's emotional temperature because she's always just like, she can see the subtle squint and describes the way, that smile was almost a leer, but then it kind of folded down into a genuine happy smile. So how much of her character did you develop through body language rather than backstory?
Isabel, first off, was probably my most fun character that I've ever created. Because first things first, this book is the first one that I ever just truly pantsed.
Oh, wow.
It was done. Like I knew that I had an idea, and I was like, I know I want it in this creepy manner, and I want it to be about death, and I rolled with it. And so Isabel kind of developed as the book went on, because when I first started writing it, I didn't know where she was going. I was just kind of describing her. And I don't know what it was about the way that, she came to me, but she just always struck me as someone whose truth lies in the smallest of their actions, the slightest shift of her body language. It was really fun to write the interactions between Noelle and Isabel, especially because both of them are very perceptive. Like Noelle notices all these little things that Isabel is doing, but Isabel also notices really specific things about Noelle. Like one of my favorite parts of the book is Noelle has a scar on her cheek from something that you will find out about later. And Isabel correctly assumes that she has hearing issues in one of her ears because of the way she turns her head when Isabel talks. And I loved that back and forth between Noelle and Isabel, where their body language said so much more than their actual language did. Even when Noelle calls Isabel out on some things that just aren't making sense, instead of giving a verbal reply to, go against whatever Noelle is experiencing, Isabel reacts physically, like a twitch in her shoulder, or maybe she's a bit more graceful in her walk. I love that little kind of cat and mouse that those two characters had.
Yeah, because Noelle she's on hyper alert because of trauma, and she's trying to figure out whether she's in danger or not. Isabel's doing the same thing, but you're not sure if she's doing it as a predator or if she's in the same position trying to figure out like what's going on with
Yes.
Noelle. Is she a little out there? Did I make a mistake?
Noelle is the prey who sees the animal lurking in the grass but doesn't know if it's a predator or if it's another preyed animal hiding from something else.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. It's almost like you wrote this.
Yeah.
Well, in chapter 5, Isabel's son Elias is introduced, almost like a mythic figure, mute, pale, freezing, but full of subtle cues and presence, which kind of goes hand in hand with how hyper alert she is. What were you trying to say about communication without language, especially when it comes to trauma?
Yeah. So one of the things that I did kind of think about was how when we talk about, traumatic experiences or things that people have gone through, a lot of times verbal communication becomes very, very shallow. It almost becomes like small talk, or even when someone's trying to talk somebody through crisis or something of that sort, a lot of times the words that we say fall short because we don't know how to truly express something through verbal language. I think you may understand this, that there are times where a hug is more important to someone going through something than anything someone could have said. And I think that in this book, especially where I was very kind of conscious about making sure that you almost never got a straight answer verbally, not until the end. Everything is sort of guarded. Every word is carefully thought out. It really does kind of, adds to the surreality. There we go. Of the whole situation. And for me, Elias is kind of like that. Elias does not communicate verbally. Everything he does is in that body language. It's in his actions. So in a lot of ways, Elias is almost the most trustworthy character in the entire story.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of EMDR? I don't know what the acronym stands for, but the treatment for trauma.
I have not.
It's so basically the school of thought is that you don't properly process a trauma, so it ends up in this feedback loop, causing anxiety and panic attacks and whatnot. So if you can fully process it, then you can let it go. And so they'll have you just start from the beginning, and then they'll stop you in the middle of it, and you watch this light bar go back and forth, and you follow it with your eyes, kind of like a cop, kind of like a police officer would make you do, follow a pen with just your eyes. And then they bring you through a little bit more, and then they stop you. I wonder if the reason is because that kind of, I don't know, centers you mentally so you can pick back up where, when verbally you're trying to say something, that traumatic feedback loop starts up and you just can't put, string two words together.
Maybe so. I wish I knew more about like psychotherapy. I would love to incorporate stuff like that in the story.
Oh, you should look up EMDR. I've gone through it one time, but yeah, the light bar, it's just this thing that goes back and forth in a trail. I think you could probably incorporate some surreality.
Yeah, there we go.
Well, Isabel describes Elias's silence in a strangely compassionate but resigned way. Quote, "He tries very hard, but he simply can't." That line lingers. Do you see his muteness as protection or as a kind of inheritance from the house itself?
See, I've always viewed it as almost like some kind of protection, like he's got something looking out for him, especially when his muteness ends up having a pretty substantial role to play as the events of the story kind of conclude and the roles of everybody become clear. Elias's inability to speak ends up really mattering for him. And so I think that in a lot of ways, I did kind of intend for it to be something almost protecting him, because in my mind, the house is pissed off that he can't talk.
Yeah. And for reasons that we can't really say. I just had an idea. Let's see how many times we can incorporate surreality into this interview. No,
sounds great.
Well, the story builds dread not through jump scares or violence, but through a steady sense of ambient wrongness, moments where everything just feels slightly off. What drew you to that approach, and what do you think it allows you to explore that more overt horror might not?
I think whenever I was kind of planning on writing the story, and as I was writing through, as I mentioned before, this one was almost completely pantsed. And, it's actually funny. So I actually wrote this story in between the beginning and the end of Dark and Endless Sea. The rough draft for this one was actually finished first. So I started Dark and Endless Sea, got about 50,000 words into it, hit a wall because, like I said before, like H.P. Lovecraft wrote short stories, you got to figure out how to end this kind of shit. I said, I'll come back to this one. I know it. And then in that meantime, I wrote all of Ashes of August Manor. And I wanted to write it very quietly. I wanted it to be sort of that. I didn't really want it to have a voice. I wanted it to have a whisper. And I wanted to have a whisper where the shit that it was saying wasn't right. Almost like I wanted the book to feel almost like one giant intrusive thought. And
that should have been a blurb.
yeah, right. So, I've done a lot of different types of quote scary shit. I've been visceral. I've been a little quieter, but the idea of quiet horror specifically really resonated with me. And I think the thing that really got me was I usually will rewatch Mike Flanagan's Haunting of Hill House probably once a year. And I've always said, everybody talks about the bent neck lady as the scariest part of the show, or that jump scare that happens in episode 9 that literally had me trying to fight the air. But to me, the scariest part of that show is in episode 3, I think, where it's Luke's story. And there's that tall man floating down the hallway, and just his cane is tapping the floor as he goes while his feet levitate off the ground. And there was something so just viscerally unnerving about that, about the quietness of it, how it felt so wrong, but you weren't sure if it was malevolent or not. And I really kind of honed in on that. And I was like, I wonder if I can take that and I can stretch that feeling for roughly 300 pages.
Nice.
And that was really what I was trying to do.
Interesting. Yeah, I must confess, I don't think I've seen that. So now
I'm fix that, dude.
Now I'm gonna have to watch it. Well, in chapter 6, we meet Parker, the family's gardener. But when Noelle sees him, she nearly unravels because he is a perfect doppelganger of her deceased boyfriend. And the resemblance is so uncanny that it triggers a near panic response. And it's as if grief itself has stepped into the room wearing a borrowed face. What drew you to the idea of grief manifesting through uncanny resemblance rather than memory alone?
I freaking love that description, as if grief stepped in wearing a borrowed face. I should have used that. Yeah, I know that I knew that I needed something else with the story. At that point, I wasn't sure where that chapter was going. I think that chapter is called A Dinner in Red. And I wasn't really sure. Like, I knew kind of that I was going to have a dinner scene, and I knew that I was like, okay, obviously, I think I'd already talked about Noelle's deceased fiance. I think it's fiance at this point. And I was like, I wonder, what can I include that might really tie to that, especially because we know that Noelle is still experiencing sort of like the lingering effects of him, because Noelle's connection with death is kind of strange. It's like she can't shake it, to the point where she still smells him even years after he's been gone. And then that's when I came up with the character of Parker, and I was like, I'm gonna make this dude look exactly like him. And then obviously that comes into play later as well. And I was like, to me, it would just add like it's another layer of surreality on top of everything that's already, it's already built up by this thing of weirdness and kind of uncomfortability. I'm like, that's just one extra layer. But I think it was a cool layer for me because it also allowed me to kind of mess with Noelle, because she kind of even confirms in the dinner that there's no way this could be him. I think she asked him to roll up his sleeve and show like a tattoo she knew her, previous fiance had. He doesn't have one. It's not him. But at the same time, just almost like those mental games of, you're already in a weird place where some weird stuff is happening. You already have this really special connection with death. Noelle is definitely someone who believes in ghosts. And so I thought that was just a really cool way to kind of add another layer of strangeness to an already strange situation that eventually took a life of its own and became an integral part of the rest of the story.
Gotcha. Oh, and if there's any more surreality, we're getting
there we go. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so we've talked about decay already and your employment of it in all of your works. So the woods come back into focus here, dark, contaminated, and full of whispering implications. Was the ecological rot meant to parallel the moral decay of the family? Or do you see nature itself as a witness to what's happened?
It was meant to. The woods are supposed to be as contaminated with what's going on as August Manor itself. And I think there's a reason why the ashes, that they don't just fall in the manor, they fall all throughout the woods. They are as corrupted as the manor is. And that was always the intention.
Well, chapter 7 dives fully into liminality. Shadows move, sound becomes unreliable, and even the architecture seems to rearrange itself. Liminal horror resists resolution. It's all tension with no release. What do you find compelling about that space between knowing and not knowing, and why did you let chapter 7 live there so completely?
It's something that I tend to employ a lot in a lot of my work, and I kind of compare it to like Pilates. And if if you've never done Pilates before, like it's like, so let's say you're doing a bench press, but instead of doing a rep where you go up and down and that's a complete rep, you're holding the weight somewhere between start and finish, and you're building muscle endurance as opposed to just brute strength. And I sort of wanted, my writing to kind of feel like that, because I think that for a writer, one of the hardest things is when you have a lot of dread and you give it that resolution, that's great. Now I have to start the next chapter. Well, now I'm starting from zero again. And I'm having to build up this new thing. It's almost like doing a rep. I've done my rep, now I'm down. Well, now I have to get it back up again. And I think that while that can work for certain kind of horror, for my particular, if you want to call it, the kind that I employ, I think that the more consistent, dreadful, just no resolution, liminality, that just kind of like just holding tension, holding tension, holding tension, I think that works better for the kind of stories that I want to tell.
Gotcha. Well, in earlier chapters, Noelle is introduced to the estate's library and a typewriter she's free to use, something that for a while allows her to write prolifically, though always about death. But in chapter 7, the act of writing returns in a much darker light. The typewriter no longer feels like a tool for expression. It becomes an anchor to something oppressive, maybe even malevolent. Do you see her creative output as an act of expression, or is it more like transcription, something being fed to her by the house or the grief embedded in it?
I think they're two sides of the same coin in this particular story. I think that her expression works hand in hand with the transcription that she's sort of almost being forced to do it. It's kind of weird to say it was like she's being forced to do it willfully. So, I mean, like, I think that it's something that definitely, I don't want to spoil too much. But there's a definite idea of like, I kind of like think about like the end of The Witch, where the devil's like behind the main character. And he says, like, "Would thou likes to live deliciously?"
Deliciously.
And he's coercing her into signing it, but she's signing it of her own free will and accord. That's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah. Yes, and piggybacking off what you just said, not to spoil it too much, I know we're getting close to that part of the book where spoilers abound. So I'm going to go ahead and quit with the narrative questions there, but as always, great, dark, immersive, and I was going to say surreal, but I'm going to hold off, and emotional work that sits in the realm of surreality. There it goes. So listeners at home, buy it, read it, and review it. One of the things I did want to ask was about your characterization of the story in the acknowledgments. You already kind of spoke about it, but you mention Shirley Jackson and Adam Neville as influences, particularly in embracing the Gothic and the folk. So where do you see Ashes of August Manor sitting between those two poles, Gothic and folk horror?
I think Ashes probably sits closer to the Gothic side. I think that if I had to give like a percentage, I'd say Ashes is probably 75-25 Gothic. But the folk aspect is something that to me works really, really well with the Gothic. I've always felt that way. And one of the books that I love to talk about is Adam Neville's House of Small Shadows, which, if you know anything about Adam Neville, he's known for The Ritual, Last Days, all these, just massive works of folk horror. Like, to me, he's the folk horror king right now. But House of Small Shadows was about 75% folk horror, but about 25% just classic Gothic. And in that story, I know it's kind of divisive among his readers. Like, some of them people really, really love it. Some people really don't like it. Me personally, I loved it. And I was always kind of enraptured with how well those two ideas played off each other. And when I decided to write Ashes of August Manor, the folk aspect wasn't even there. It was originally just going to be it's a classic Gothic story. But as I was writing it, I couldn't help the intrusion of folk horror. It's something that I've included, so many times before. And when I decided on the aspect of folk that I wanted to include in it, what I found was the same way I liked that little, synergy that they had in House of Small Shadows, I noticed that with this book as well. Whereas even though I kind of flipped the percentages, I'm on 75% classic Gothic, I was kind of shocked at how easily they kind of just meshed in with each other, almost like chain links.
Gotcha. Well, you close by saying, quote, "Now it's time to let them sing their dark song." So what to you is that song? What were you hoping it would leave echoing in the reader's mind?
I think that I really hope that this book, for all of its bleakness, and there's a lot of bleakness in this book.
Yes, indeed.
There's times that I feel like when I'm describing it, like I feel like I'm like an emo kid in 2005. Like listening to Hawthorne Heights on repeat. Like,
I was gonna say Sunny Day Real Estate.
Yeah, that too. But at the same time, I think that there is this ember of hope that is sort of burning throughout the book, even as things get dark and take darker and darker and darker turns and more depraved turns. I think that there's always sort of like that light, because I don't want this to feel, I never wanted it to feel like it's going to sound weird to say, but like a condemnation of death. Because, I think back to A Dark Rue, one particular scene at the very end of that book where a character who I won't name says that life works best when death is its natural conclusion. And that line has always stuck with me even after I wrote it. And I kind of employed that here as well. I think that maybe I want my readers to get a sense of closure. And that's a weird thing to say, because obviously I don't know what my readers have gone through, but I feel like everyone's sort of gone through loss in some way. And I think for a lot of people, they're probably holding on to whatever it was that's no longer here. Like, for me personally, I know that not making my grandfather's funeral has really messed with me mentally for the last 7 years. So, and even though I know it was the right decision, my wife was pregnant with my first child at the time. We don't know how to drive down here in the snow. We don't have chains in our tires. And it was an hour away. I could not make that drive. It still stuck with me. So in a lot of ways, I do hope that there's an element of closure that I think a lot of readers can take from this. I hope they feel like the story ends with closure. And I hope that they, have that feeling of finality when it's done.
And this is something I really wanted to talk about. You mentioned it earlier, that the Ashes of August Manor was written, quote, "in the quiet without much fanfare, even sharing its announcement with another novel." And you said it was written like within your previous book. How did you word that?
It was written between the 50,000 word Point of Dark and Endless Sea and the ending of that book.
And the ending. Okay. So in what ways do you think that mirrors the themes inside Ashes of August Manor, especially ideas around grief, presence, and being unseen?
I think that that's always been sort of like a little charm I think that the book had, even with me, because it wasn't lost on me. Like, it wasn't something that I just recently came to realize. Like, the whole time that I was reading it and writing it and promoting it, it always seemed like it wasn't a book that stuck out. It just sort of kind of lingered in the background. It shared an announcement with my next novel, which I think is the one that the audiobooks were signed at the same time. I think the audiobook company was more excited about the next one than they were this one. Although I will say the audiobook for Ashes of August Manor, Jennifer Pickens did the narration, and it might be the optimal way to experience the book. So if you're an audiobook fan, go for it. She crushed it.
Nice.
But it really always did kind of feel like it was just this almost like Elias, like soundlessly just kind of lingering in the back. And I think that works for what the story is about too. And I think that helped me during the editing process, especially when I was trying to make sure that everything worked the way I wanted it to work. It was a book that I think knew itself very well. It didn't have an identity crisis. You know, I've said before, sometimes books can have an identity crisis during the editing process where they're not really sure where they want to go. I think this book knew in a weird way. I think that the surrounding elements of how it was written, you know, how it was edited, even the cover, it's probably the least standout cover. It's just plain, it's black white contrast, you know. So I think that I think in a lot of ways it's a book that knows itself very well, and the silence that it was written in, I think, lends itself to that.
Yeah, let's see here. Huh? I guess I'm more of a minimalist black and white type of guy anyway.
Well, we had another one that I made the cover for this one, and I originally had one where it had like a painting on the wall of a woman's face with like something coming out from behind it, and it looks really, really cool, but we're like, I don't know, is it too loud? Is it like too much stuff going on? And I sat down and did this one, and then I ended up making that Raven design, and I was like, I want to try this. I want to see what this looks like in action. And I think the cover itself comes across quite quiet, and I like that. It's kind of subtle, subdued. So yeah, I think that's in and of itself, I think the book's creation definitely lends itself to its personality.
Nice. Well, how are things going in the Wicked House family? I have recently had Andrew Nyberg, MJ Mars, Caleb Jones. I'm probably forgetting somebody. Didn't they just transfer? I don't know exactly what the deal was. They merged with somebody, something like that?
A new distributor
Okay.
that would allow us to get our books more easily into bookstores where we wouldn't have Barnes and Noble, you know, thumbing their noses up at us. It's going really, really well. I know MJ's got one that just came out, I think 2 weeks ago of the date of this, you know, recording. That's absolutely phenomenal. Andrew's book coming
Extinction.
out in August. Yes,
Extinction Dream.
I actually had the opportunity to read that one before it was edited. Not this past January, but last January. So January of 2024. And I remember I messaged him. I said, dude, you owe me money for ibuprofen because my head hurts so bad. It's so freaking good. Caleb is a special talent as well. And Will Gray's got a new one coming out as well. And I can't wait he just sent me the file to start reading it. I can't wait to, you know, jump into that one. But yeah, it's going really, really well. Especially when you talk about like all the stuff that's kind of befallen a lot of indie presses over the last couple of years. When you talk about like the Darklit fiasco and what recently happened with a couple of presses that weren't paying their authors, you know, it's a comforting thought to know that I'm not, you know, going to wake up one morning and find my rights gone, or, you know, find my book not, you know, being published after promises of it or things like that. So yeah, and the talent that they're bringing in, there's a few others that I know of that I can't say yet. It's really exciting. It's so crazy how far that press has come since, you know, 2022, when I just stumbled across a Facebook ad, and I think at that point they'd only signed one book.
Yeah, I mean, I always say, whether I know who the person is or not, I could just go through the books listed on their website and just pick somebody, and it would be amazing.
Yeah, and right now we're kind of in the middle of, we joke about it because when Wicked House first started out, there was a little 3-month period of, it was MJ's book, my book, and then Andrew's books. That was The Suffering, Broken Places, and Mobius Door. And now the three of us are back to back to back once again, years later, and we both have a couple of books under our belts. And it's been so fun just to watch their growth, especially, and to see the kind of writers that they've grown into. The point where it's like I get excited when MJ tells me she's working on something new, or I get excited when Andrew's got a new project that he's working on. So yeah, it's going really well.
Yeah, out of all of these on this page, 9 of these authors have been on my show. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. I could just go through. They're all badass. Well, here's you've already mentioned an interesting anecdote with a review on one of your books, but you state in an Instagram post that Ashes of August Manor is actually your best reviewed work to date. Tell us about that and why you think that is.
Well, I usually when I release a book, I'm pretty much consumed with self-doubt, and I think that it sucks and that no one's gonna like it, and I pretty much want to crawl into a ball and just die because I know everyone's gonna hate this thing.
Scream into the void.
Right. Like, and I was like, this book sucks. Especially because, like, when you write a book, you're especially if you edit it the way that I do, which is like the copy that my editor will get is like the 7th or 8th draft. Like, I've gone through it like crazy. Well, once you've read something that much, you pretty much are convinced that it sucks.
Yeah.
Well, but this is the first book that I ever had. And I even told Patrick, the owner of Wicked House, I was like, dude, this book is good. Like, I know it's good. Like, I felt it in my heart. I was like, I feel good about this one. And Andrew jokes actually that this is like I Blaine Daigled harder than I've ever Blaine Daigled before. And in a funny kind of way, he's right. I think that this is a book that really is kind of an encapsulation of everything that has made my voice over these past few years. There's elements of everything. I know I've grown as a writer, obviously. I think this is my best written book. Now, I'm fully aware that the early reviews that came in that were glowing, most of them came from people who were fans. They were people that when they had the opportunity to pick up the arc, jumped at it. So obviously those are going to be a little skewed. And I know that as it becomes more and more and more widely read, I know where discourse is going to go. I know there's going to be a lot of people that are like, I picked up this horror book and, it's slow. And I'm like, I know it's slow. I wrote it that way. So I know that that's going to happen. What I like though is the people that seem to like the kind of stuff that I write are having a really, really good time with it. They're seeming to really enjoy it. And I've had a few people tell me it was their favorite. I think that in a way, it sort of encapsulates everything that I've done up to this point. I could say the same thing about my upcoming book as well, but in a different light. And not to mention, it's a Gothic haunted house story at its heart. And those are generally just fun. Like, people enjoy those. And then you talk about like the idea of death, and that's something that is very accessible. I joke with my dad, A Dark and Endless Sea, which was also, really well received. As much as I love it, let's be honest here, it's in a lot of ways it's not super accessible to people who don't read horror on the daily basis, This one is. So perhaps that's the reason as well. But I'm very happy with the reception that it's gotten. I hope people continue to enjoy it. Yeah, so that's that.
Yeah, with the exception of that one guy that was complaining about the surreality. I had to redeem myself.
Yeah.
All right. Well, would you like to read a passage from the book?
Absolutely. So I kind of went back and forth about what I wanted to read. I kind of ended up deciding I wanted to read the opening couple of paragraphs because, as I mentioned before, this book is in a lot of ways a love letter to Shirley Jackson, The Haunting of Hill House. And that was very clearly the front of my mind whenever I wrote these opening lines. I kind of wanted it to be a bit of an homage to that epic opening to The Haunting of Hill House. So from chapter 1, The Boy Who Couldn't Speak. Beneath the dark gaze of night, the settling bones of August Manor sent creaking echoes through the still veins of its ancestral body. The place rested deep in the Oregon pines, surrounded for miles upon miles by fog-covered wilderness. Atop the creaking house was the soft touch of a steady shower. The rain hit the outside of the manor tenderly, as though nature itself were afraid to subject that frail old home to too much force. Beside a large lake and waterfall, it stood alone in the fog, the remnant flesh of history. And yet, within its dark and creaking halls was the faint heat of life. 3 lives, the heat from one of them fading quickly. In the second-floor bedroom closest to the stairs, 10-year-old Elias August sat on his bed, his knees pulled up to his chin. He rocked back and forth in a steady rhythm, the creaking of the bed joining the echoes of the old home. He hadn't slept at all tonight, and his mind, foggy with the allure of oncoming sleep, refused to let the boy slip away into slumber. Inside the wide space that was his bedroom, shadows danced and crept along the dark tapestries of his walls. With every twist and turn of the silhouettes, Elias thought of the moment he knew was coming, when one of the shadows would manifest into a reaching tree branch and wrap around his ankle, pulling him from his bedroom window and into the wild outside, out into the fog. It never had, not once in his 10 years of life, but there was a first for everything. And tonight was different. Grandpa wasn't doing very well. Through the walls, he heard the man next door's labored breathing. Grandpa had been like that for a while, and occasionally a wet cough reminiscent of drowning would join the chorus of echoes bleeding from the manor. Without Grandpa, there would be nothing to stop the voices from the woods, nothing to stop the shaking whispers in his mind, nothing to keep Old Crow in check. Because of that, Elias August was terrified. When it happened, when the shadows materialized into his room and took him, his silent scream would be heard by no one. He would leave no trace behind. Quick and quiet, he would be gone into the night and echo himself. The only thing left behind would be the black streak on the floor, but that never mattered to anyone here.
Very good, sir. Well, last question. I know you are a busy man. What's new in your life since we last spoke?
Not much. I think the process of creativity has slowed down a bit, not because I'm short of ideas, but because just now that I've got, 4 releases under my belt with the 5th coming and a 6th coming up soon, a lot of time spent with marketing things, a lot of time spent, just trying to manage the whole business side of the thing, of the job. Now I do commission covers now as well, so that takes up a little bit of my time. So I'm a little bit busier. I'm obviously not pumping these things out the way that I used to, but in a lot of ways, I think that's a good thing. I think, Ashes of August Manor, I think part of its quality comes from the fact that it did have a long gestation cycle where it was kind of, for 2 years, I was just sitting on it. I was editing it relentlessly. And I think maybe that extra time in the oven did it well. So yeah, just a lot busier.
Sounds good. Good and bad, but ultimately good. Well, Blaine, as always, it has been a pleasure talking with you.
Absolutely. Likewise.
So as we bring the show to a close, is there anything you'd like to plug or reiterate or let your readers know about?
Yeah. So I cannot reiterate this enough that if you are an audio person, the audio book for Ashes of August Manor is absolutely incredible. And I say that as someone that doesn't usually listen to my books. I listened to this one all the way through because Jennifer Pickens did an unbelievable job with this narration. Keep an eye out for future announcements as well. Feel free to follow me on Facebook and Instagram. That's pretty much it.
All right. Sounds good, my friend. Well, listeners at home, all links are in the description. And Blaine, thank you again for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you to everyone who tuned in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Be sure to tune in next Tuesday for a new episode featuring the best and brightest authors and filmmakers of dark literature and film. So until then, stay healthy, stay sane, and as always, thank you for listening. See you next time.